Hi everyone, I'm Simon Mahdi, and I'm part of the Forsyth County Drug Awareness Council. So I'll be hosting a short little interview series, podcast sort of things to help spread more awareness on drug abuse and prevention, stuff like that. So today I actually have the privilege of interviewing Jeff Breedlove, and he's the Chief of Communications and Policy at the Georgia Council of Recovery and Substance Abuse. So Jeff actually has an incredible background in public service and recovery advocacy. He has a lot of experience, stories, his personal stories that he can share with us today. And we'll be going into that in our interview. And this is my friend Jeff Breedlove, who works at the Georgia Council for Recovery. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jeff?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me on. So I'm Jeff Breedlove, and I'm a person in long-term recovery from addiction. And what that means to me is that after 30 years of active addiction, I've known the hope and joy of recovery for 9 years. In fact, I just celebrated on October 26th my 9-year celebration. And so I'm a guy who's been blessed to survive the disease killing more people aged 18 to 25 than anything else in America, which is addiction, fentanyl poisonings and overdoses. And I grew up in Georgia. I was born and raised in Georgia, and I've been married to my wife for 31 years. We have a son who we adopted when he was 6. He was born in China. His name was Jack. And my family has been a part of my journey through addiction and into recovery. I believe deeply that it's a family disease, and my addiction impacted my family, and my recovery has impacted my family. So my career as an adult coincided when I was about 20 with my active addiction. So I grew up as a young adult and become an older adult in basically an active addiction. And so my career was in government and politics and policy, running campaigns, working for the government itself and nonpartisan jobs, the taxpayer funded jobs. And when I got arrested, I was charged with a felony, lying to the police. They did not have a drug charge. They knew drugs were involved, but I didn't have anything on me. They couldn't charge me with possession or anything. And they charged me, I believe, to save my life. I think they really did. And it made the news in the Atlanta metro media market, which, is a pretty big media market. For 6 days in a row, there were stories about me on the news getting arrested. And I thought my life was over, and I was 50 years old. And I thought, that's it, I'm done. But I decided to go to treatment. I decided to give this recovery thing a chance. I didn't want to. I was angry. I was scared. I was embarrassed. I was petrified. Also facing a felony charge
Right.
and divorce if I didn't do it. And all this stuff, didn't give it a chance. And found recovery at a place called MARR, MARR. It's in DeKalb County, Georgia. And I found recovery there. I worked to sustain my recovery after I left treatment, and I relied on a network of brothers and sisters, because you see, the opposite of addiction is not connection. I mean, it's not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And I learned to connect with people and build a network of people that believed in me. And then I got into recovery, and I had the opportunity to join the Georgia Council for Recovery. And then later start the American Addiction Recovery Association with my partner, Scott Cochran, who's also in recovery. And I've gotten the privilege over the past 9 years to advocate to government and business, to faith leaders, to law enforcement leaders, to education leaders, for laws and rules and regulations to benefit people and families who have been impacted by addiction and not discriminate against us. And I've had the privilege to advocate for funding from government and from businesses to fund programs to help people with treatment, with prevention, with harm reduction, and of course recovery. And that's what I do for a living. It's of course not a trajectory for everybody,
Yeah.
but it's where God put me, and I feel like I'm very blessed that I survived, because the number one cause of death for Americans 18 to 45 is addiction. And I survived, and now I get to use those professional skills that I learned while I was in active addiction to try to give back and try to help the next person and help the next family and make sure nobody else dies from this, and that we have laws that help us and don't discriminate against us. That's a little bit about who I am.
Okay. So Jeff, you said that you work at the Georgia Council for Recovery. So what really like inspired you to get more involved in this field?
Well, what inspired me was I had always worked in government politics. And when I found recovery, and then I learned there was this whole community out there that I wasn't alone.
Hmm.
Um, I quickly learned that my community did not have an effective voice knowing how to lobby for laws and funding the way that people impacted by cancer and diabetes and AIDS and Alzheimer's and other medical issues do. And all those at one point or another had stigmas around them too. And my disease, people, my brothers and sisters and our families, we have stigma around us still today in 2025 and 6. And so I wanted to join with other like-minded people uh, that had gone ahead of me and that were there also now, and join with a team of leaders and advocate for laws, rules, regulations, and funding to help my community break stigma down around it and get funding and laws to help people who are in addiction find recovery.
Okay. So from like your point of view, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people still have about prescription drugs or opioid misuse?
Well, I think, well, the biggest one, and I was talking to a mom today who lost her son literally to this scenario,
Hmm.
is that, I don't think that medical doctors are educated enough in medical school and with their continuing education requirements to know how to talk to families about not overprescribing. And I think families still to this day believe it won't happen to us, and people believe it won't happen to me. And people have to understand that fentanyl has changed the game, opioids have changed the game. The age of experimentation is over. I was a young man in the late 1970s and early 80s. And back then, 40 years ago, people could experiment with drugs, and it didn't necessarily mean it was a death sentence. 9 years ago, when I was in active addiction, I had never heard the word fentanyl. We thought drug dealers wanted repeat customers. All that's changed. And so the biggest misconception is that it can't happen to us. The other thing is that people don't stop on social media and educate themselves and their families to learn about this. And frankly, the biggest misconception is kind of a bias that our community leaders, they don't want to talk about it at the Rotary and the Kiwanis and the Sunday school and the Boy Scout meeting and the PTA meeting, because they don't want their community identified with drug addicts. And there's not been a single community in Georgia. There's not been a single community in the United States that has been spared the addiction epidemic. And so the biggest misconception is it can't happen here to us in our community. And it can happen to everybody and anybody from everywhere and anywhere.
Right. And I feel like that's something a lot of teens can relate to as well. And like you're saying, social media is like a big factor as well. So do you think like there's some misinformation online that makes the problem more worse?
Oh, absolutely. My son is 25 years old. He just went
Hmm.
to high school and then his undergraduate college, and I had the great privilege. He played high school and college football, and I met many of his teammates and other students. And I know I'm an old guy now, but I love social media, and I get on there, and I think that when I was in high school and college, I thought I was invincible, and I thought I was young and strong and healthy, and I was a little bit arrogant, and I thought, oh, bad things happen to other people, but it's not going to happen to me. I'm very smart, and I'm outgoing, and I'm dynamic, and I'm gonna start. I'm gonna be the president. Well, I got to tell you, it can happen to anybody, and it can happen as fast as lightning. You know, there's so many temptations out there, and I was tempted as a young person. And as a young man, you know, women and sex and money and the allure of all these things. They're very tempting to young people, and I'm sure they are for young women too. And it's even magnified now on social media with a smartphone in our hands all the time. And I think for young people, here's the reality. It's contradictory. The most important voice in any process is the voice of lived experience when we're talking about addiction. And the most important voice when we're talking about young people is the voice of young people. And people older than me, even people like me in recovery, we still have to listen to what is relevant to young people today. I was just educated by a young man just out of high school, just beginning his collegiate journey, who told me, Jeff, and I know his father very well, and he said, Jeff, you don't understand. We go to a high school program, a track, for college prep, or we go to college and they tell us, well, all these majors make money. But he said, what you don't get is with AI and all this technology, everything's changing so fast. And the stress and pressure on us, we could pick a course in our junior year in high school to get ready for college. And by the time we get there, they tell us, oh, that degree is worthless and it's outdated. I know that young people are facing social, educational, technological challenges that I didn't face. So we have to listen to y'all. But by the same token, the contradictory part of that is young people just don't have the lived experience that older people have. It's called discernment. And I did not have the same discernment as a 30-something-year-old young man who has begun my active addiction and I'm put in charge of a multi-million-dollar political campaign in my early 30s. I thought I was the smartest guy on the planet. Well, I wasn't. I was certainly talented and I was certainly very smart. But the 58-year-old mentor who had run campaigns for 30 years, I realized later on he knew more than he had forgotten more than I knew. So I do think that people my age have to listen to and respect the views and perspectives of young people. But also I think young people need to hear from a voice like me that don't make the same mistakes I did. And it's okay to listen to folks older than you. It's okay to say, I don't have to do that to be cool. I don't have to do that to prove I can do that. And I will remind you of this: if you're in your 20s and younger today, the reality of the science of addiction, the reality of the chemicals in the products is very different, and it will kill you dead more times than not. And you just don't get the same age of experimentation that older people did, and it's something you have to confront and talk about as a group of young leaders. Is it can kill us faster than it killed our parents.
Absolutely. So, branching off to what you said about the youth, what trends or changes have you noticed recently in how communities, or even young people for that matter, are responding to the overdose crisis that's happening?
No, it's interesting. The most effective thing I've seen was I was privileged to be a part of a project, and it's still ongoing. It's called Georgia Recovers. Governor Brian Kemp has been a terrific supporter of recovery, and he allowed funding in the Georgia budget for us to do what we call a Georgia Recovers campaign. And we had billboards, and we did videos, and we had events, and all of that was great, and it is great, and it's helpful. But we did geo-targeting on smartphones. So we could target literally. I'll give you a real example. During the football season, high school football season,
Mm-hmm.
we looked at the top 10 rankings every week and looked up the zip code of the home game that weekend of the top 10 teams in all the divisions in Georgia high school football. And we micro-targeted about a 2-mile radius of the football stadium. And we watched how it was pinging on people's phones who were there at the game. And we could tell the demographics from the phone provider. So we could tell if it was an older adult, a student. We could tell who was clicking on the ad that was popping up as they were doing their scrolling on social media. So one of the most effective things I've seen is taking the message to the technology, going where people are, and people are on their phones. And I think we're learning how to use messages that old people relate to on their ads, young people relate to on their ads, so that they will stop on that pop up and click. The second most impactful thing that I've witnessed the past couple of years is the Georgia Council for Recovery. We have what's called the CARES warm line. Okay, so it's not a crisis. I mean, you could be in a crisis and call it, but it's really a warm line, meaning you found some recovery and you just need somebody to talk to. You don't like to go to meetings, you don't have the money to go to meetings, whatever, but you can call this number and there's going to be somebody in recovery on the other end that's going to listen to you, going to talk to you, just whatever. And it's a great thing. Well, like myself and some of the others, we never know who calls, and it's not appropriate for us to know who calls. Well, we get back in stats, and there's some questions they ask to find out, well, the age and where you are and all this stuff. What part of Georgia are you in? And most people will answer those generic type questions. But we noticed that young people weren't using the warm line. And somebody had the idea, a young person, that we should look at this opportunity, this app that would allow text to be on there. And so we listened to this one young person, and we challenged them and said, anybody else agree with you? So we brought some young people together and listened to them. And they were like, yes, we're telling you, people will text you. They will not call you, but they'll text you. So we implemented this based solely to reach young people. And every single month for the past 4 years, the number of users has gone up every month. And they're almost all young people. And again, that was one of the coolest new things I saw, was not to listen to the way older people like me thought we reached young people, but listen to the way young people say reach us. The other thing I'll share is I think we're having an awakening. We're having an awakening that fentanyl is a game changer. And I think we're reaching that point where there's so many funerals in communities. And so many of those funerals are in high schools and colleges that young people are like, okay, I've had enough of this. And moms and dads have said, I've had enough of this. And they're tired of being told by the establishment, this is the only way to do things. And they're saying, we demand new ideas. And they're showing up to town hall meetings. We had a couple of town hall meetings a month ago connected to the Georgia Recovers bus tour, where, in the middle of the business day, there were 120 people. In the evening, there were 90-something people coming out because they're sick and tired of going to funerals in communities in rural Georgia, in suburban Georgia, or suburban Atlanta, and frankly, in communities like mine in Grant Park and downtown Atlanta. So I think we've reached this point where people have had enough, and they want to know what to do.
Wow. So when you talk about the awakening, I feel like that really struck me. So what do you think are the most effective strategies for like raising awareness, especially among youth students and groups like ours?
I kind of alluded to that.
Yeah, for technology.
I think we have to be willing to, right, we have to be willing to invest in technology. We have to be willing to have focus groups, whether it's with student government leaders or the captains of the football, volleyball, basketball, track teams, or whoever, or youth leaders, and listen to them. And then, frankly, we got to be willing to try to get the kids that, frankly, aren't the student leaders, the ones that may have gotten in trouble, the ones that may have already had legal or societal, consequences, and listen to them too, and not just the A+ students, but the students that are themselves dealing with this. And elevate their voices. And I frankly heard that same speech when I was a student government leader in high school and college. So I know people have been saying that for 40 years. But I know 40 and 50 years ago, with addiction, people weren't dying at the rates they are today. So I do think adults like me have to be willing to do that. When we are investing in programs with opioid settlement dollars, which we are doing in Georgia, we need more youth groups to apply for those dollars. for themselves, for youth-led programs, young adult programs. And that's something, frankly, that I think the Youth Council, can work with the Georgia Council for Recovery and work on is how do we educate youth groups on how to fill those applications out so that some of these dollars can be awarded directly to them. Frankly, so adults don't have to be involved at all. It could be a program envisioned by young people, run by young people, and implement, and supported by young people. I think we've got to bring more young people into this opioid settlement dollar process. I think we've got to have young people, though. It's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? We got to have people like older adults be willing to go out to young people. But frankly, and this is what I hope you guys talk about when guys like me aren't around. At some point, there's got to be a comfort level with the young people to go, okay, these guys work for the Georgia Council for Recovery. They're all in recovery. They're not going to judge me. They're not going to preach to me. They're safe. I can talk to them. And I can talk to them about policy, my big ideas, the concepts that I've always wanted to do, and they will listen to me. And I think we have to overcome the stigma as older people that we don't listen. But part of it is just connecting. Again, the opposite of addiction is connection, and the way we get to solutions for treatment programs, for prevention programs, for harm reduction programs, for recovery programs, is to start connecting with each other. And that's a level of trust that has to be built generationally. And I think we got to work on that.
Right. So is there any final message you'd like to leave, especially for the students or any kids who might be watching this and want to get involved in prevention or maybe recovery efforts?
Sure. I have a two-part message.
Mm-hmm.
The first part is, believe it or not, I was once your age. I had a lot more hair, didn't wear glasses, and there was a lot of stress I was under, a lot of pressure, and there was some trauma I was dealing with. And on the one hand, I was insecure and depressed. And on the other hand, I was the smartest guy in the world and arrogant. And I just ping-ponged every day when I was a young adult. And I felt so alone. And I need you to understand that you're not alone. And there are people out there who have been there, done that, been where you are. And if you are at all experiencing anything with suicide or mental health or addiction issues, do reach out to the Georgia Council for Recovery, and it's easy to find us. Reach out to Jeff Breedlove. It's really easy to find me on social media, and we'll get you connected with somebody that you're comfortable with for $0, and you don't have to be alone. But beyond that, if you've made the decision you want to get involved, we have 52 recovery community organizations around Georgia that work with the Georgia Council for Recovery. We have a great network of prevention organizations led by my friend John Bringell. We have a recovery housing organization. We have a clinical organization. If you wanted to go into it clinically and you want to learn how to become somebody professionally involved. So there's associations out there that if you are like, I want to do what Breedlove does, and I want to advocate, and I want to lobby for laws and funding, and I want to say I support this and oppose that, contact me and contact the Georgia Council for Recovery and say, I want to get hooked up with this Breedlove guy to advocate. Because we do that from Washington to the state capitol in Atlanta to county commissions and city councils in every single county and city in the state of Georgia. And we'd love to have you involved as a volunteer, especially as a young voice. And then if you want to learn other aspects of it, again, there are prevention efforts you could be a part of. There's harm reduction efforts you could be a part of. All you got to do is reach out to the council, and we will, for free, hook you up with whatever lane you're interested in. And we need you. We need every voice we can get.
Right. But thank you once again, Jeff, for able to spend some time, spread more awareness and your stories and your experience for that fact. But thank you, Jeff, for all this.
Thank you. And let me just say that I say to everybody that addiction is very real. It's very deadly, but recovery is real for everybody, any place, anytime, anywhere.
Thank you.